Story 1. No, because I do not trust the justice system enough to make such a decision. I agree that some people deserve it, but too many innocent individuals are convicted for me to support that penalty being allowed. Story 2. The death penalty requires one of the following assumptions. 1. The government never makes a mistake. It is acceptable to kill innocent people. I do not believe either of these, so I am against the death penalty. Story 3. I have a long list of moral, financial, efficiency, and political reasons. Ultimately, it comes down to the simple fact that no government should have the power to kill its own citizens. Story 4. Only if there is absolute concrete evidence and not even a chance that anyone else could have done it. Story 5. Do I believe some people deserve to die for what they have done? That removing some from society permanently is sometimes the only answer to an extreme behavioral issue that cannot or will not be rectified. Sure. Do I trust any state or governing body to properly exercise the authority to do so without harming people who did not deserve to die and leading to the weaponization of the system against underprivileged classes? Absolutely not. There are two exceptions I struggle to find justification for, but I believe in them. One is the principle that the individual knows what they did to deserve this. Hitler and Mussolini are archetypal examples in this category. The Nuremberg trials were an ineffective judicial process that let 99% of those responsible evade consequences. But those who were sentenced knew what they did to deserve it. If Brian Thompson had faced legal consequences, he would have understood his guilt, and if he did not, he would have been a sociopath who would still qualify for extensive re-education. Thompson brings us to the second exception. I believe in a hypothetical death penalty and stringent, excessive legal and social penalties for law enforcement officers, military personnel, politicians, lobbyists, executives, and similar individuals who are found guilty of abusing public trust, the public commons, or any member of the public. Jobs that come with a high level of privilege and potential for abuse need to be balanced with significant responsibility and accountability to the people, or else we end up right where we are now. Story 6. Do some people deserve to die for their crimes? Sure. Do I trust the government to fairly and accurately assess this? No. Story 7. No, the grounds of our defense system are fallible. People on death row are occasionally found innocent years after their execution. I am not sure why people think it is acceptable to kill a person who may be innocent. Story 8. I believe that some crimes, such as child molestation and forcible rape, should be addressed more seriously. There is often no rehabilitation for certain offenders, and they can become a burden on taxpayers or a danger to society. If there is clear evidence of guilt for heinous acts like senseless murder or child molestation, the perpetrator should face the maximum consequences at the earliest opportunity. Story 9. I agree that some deeds are so evil that the only just punishment is death. However, I do not trust the government with the power to take the lives of its own citizens, much less ensure that no innocents are convicted. Story 10. Even if the justice system were perfect, I am not comfortable with my government taking lives. Additionally, our legal system has significant flaws. Eyewitness testimony can be unreliable, polygraph tests are ineffective, and there is a considerable credibility gap between law enforcement, expert witnesses, and those accused of murder. Forensic evidence is not as infallible as television suggests. Story 11. I do not believe in it at all because there is always a chance the wrong person will be executed. There have been many cases of innocent people being put to death, with their innocence discovered years later. I do not think any fallible system should be responsible for killing people. Governments can be corrupt, and they should not be entrusted with the power to decide who lives and dies, even if it concerns violent criminals. Being stripped of their right to exist within society is punishment enough. Story 12. I am not sure how I feel about it. It is not a deterrent, and currently, it ends up costing more with the appeals than housing them for life. Housing them for life away from society at least means they live with the knowledge. If it is a wrongful conviction, it can be overturned. It seems like it is more about vengeance than justice. But then there are pedophiles and serial killers. I wish I had clearer feelings. Story 13. The death penalty is justified when it is undeniable that a person committed a heinous act. Consider cases like Dylan Roof and El Chapo. In other situations, it may not be appropriate due to the potential for human error in trials. Story 14. If you take someone's life in cold blood, I believe you have lost all your rights as a human and should be punished accordingly. Story 15. I believe the person who ran me off the road the other day should face consequences. So yes, I fully support that idea. There is too much negativity in this world. Story 16. I have no issues with it except that it takes 30 to 40 years to implement. Honestly, I believe the worst penalty is sitting in jail with no hope of getting out for 40 to 50 years until you die a natural death. Story 17. Any place that mandates death penalties should require a jury to convene and collectively press a button on the day of execution that causes the person's death. It needs the weight of a collective guilty conscience. If the decision isn't unanimous, then it should not proceed. Story 18. There should be a way to separate individuals who have been proven to have committed heinous acts against others. I often see the argument that it costs more to keep individuals on death row than in the general population, so why not place everyone in the general population and let the problem resolve itself? Story 19. No, it is pointless. The process is difficult for everyone except the offender. A life wasted in prison is far more just a waste they experience every day. Story 20. There are supermax prisons filled with individuals who deserve the death penalty, and it does not need to be humane. Why are we funding this? Story 21. Murder is wrong regardless of the term used. If it is necessary to kill in order to defend life and prevent a crime, then one must do what is necessary. However, when imprisonment is an option, murder is not justified, and there is no valid reason to take a life. Story 22. With nearly 7 billion people on the planet, eliminating a convicted murderer serves the public, especially the prison guards who have to manage dangerous individuals. We need to streamline the appeals process and expedite executions. Story 23. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. Most people here probably aren't considering that their answers could make them a victim of their own opinions. Story 24. Why should a murderer, rapist, or child molester be housed, clothed, and fed at the expense of taxpayers? They are like rabid animals and need to be dealt with accordingly. Story 25. I disagree with how insincere we are about it. It is a means of torture and murder disguised as justice. Some people need to be fed feet first into a wood chipper. We are either fine with that or we are not. Story 26. As long as there is any possibility of an innocent person being convicted, the death penalty cannot be a just punishment. Story 27. Good answers here, so I will add a different context to the question. When I was in college, I was assigned in a logic class to argue in favor of the death penalty against a student who would argue the opposite. One interesting aspect is deterrence. Does executing one murderer prevent other potential murderers from committing the crime? Research shows that in countries that have swift justice, where the guilty party is put to death soon after being found guilty, there is a strong deterrent effect. In countries like the United States, where appeals can take decades, there is no deterrent effect. Story 28. I would like to hear people's opinions on cases of extreme child abuse. In such instances, society is better off without those individuals. Story 29. If it is a complete certainty that a person murdered an innocent individual, then yes. Anything less requires life without parole until exoneration. Story 30. Only in clear-cut cases where there is no doubt they actually committed a crime in an extremely cruel manner. Story 31. Yes, I believe it should apply to rapists, pedophiles, and child abusers in general. We should consider exceptions for these crimes in relation to the Cruel and Unusual Punishment Amendment and ensure that the consequences are appropriately severe. Story 32. If the evidence is especially strong and the crime is particularly heinous, addressing the situation with a bullet would be better for society as a whole than siphoning money from others just to keep them alive. Story 33. I do not agree that the police can confidentially arrest the right person, especially when it comes to minorities. They already hold significant power. Imagine giving them a way to legally take lives. Story 34. I did at one point. Seems fair, an eye for an eye. But if we are to truly believe in the adage innocent until proven guilty, I don't think we can also support the death penalty. There have been dozens, if not hundreds, of people proven innocent over time as new evidence emerged, especially DNA evidence. Just one person on death row who shouldn't be there is enough to void the whole system, in my opinion. How many innocent people have died because evidence wasn't collected effectively? Because of someone's bias, or because we just didn't have good enough technology at the time? One is too much. Story 35. I am against the death penalty for multiple reasons. Firstly, mistakes in justice cannot be entirely avoided. You cannot undo a mistake and release someone who turned out to be innocent once they are dead. Secondly, I see sentencing as achieving two goals: reforming a person to become a productive member of society instead of a destructive one, and removing a dangerous person from society. The death penalty cannot achieve the former and is not needed for the latter. The only thing the death penalty achieves is revenge, and I do not believe that law should be about revenge. Thirdly, by killing someone, I believe we lose part of ourselves. If not for revenge, there is no benefit to the death penalty, and it brings negative consequences for us. Here is a thought experiment to illustrate this point. Imagine society votes on the death penalty and decides it should exist. Then I propose that when it is time to carry out the sentence, all who voted for it should be gathered, and one of them should be randomly selected as the executioner. If that person refuses to carry out the execution, it indicates that we cannot trust the results of the vote, and the death penalty should be abolished immediately. If you are not willing to kill, you do not truly support the death penalty. Story 36. Yes, it should be used more often. In a non-real example, a joker kills thousands because he goes to jail and then is released or escapes. Stopping him would save far more lives than the one lost. In the United States, we had the three-strike system where criminals spend life in prison, which is acceptable. Now, thieves and those with criminal mental illnesses are released after numerous arrests, leading to increasingly violent crimes. To save taxpayer dollars, they should be removed. They cannot be helped. Story 37. Yes, I believe that if the punishment is severe enough, more people will rethink their actions based on the consequences. Story 38. I have found great satisfaction in reading obituary notices. I never got into the habit of such actions. I could mention many names of individuals whose obituaries I would be pleased to read in the paper each morning. Clarence Darrow. Story 39. I agree it should exist as a deterrent, but every effort should be made to rehabilitate and correct the convicted within reasonable bounds, in line with the correctional system's original function. Story 40. False convictions occur, and any false conviction is too many. Consider what the Trump administration is doing right now with these supposed illegal immigrants. Have all of them been granted due process for their deportations? Now imagine that scenario in cases involving the death penalty. Rights violations could result in many innocent people dying. It is also state-sanctioned murder, an eye-for-an-eye approach. This is not the way to deliver justice. The goal should be to protect society, and executing a guilty person does nothing more to safeguard society than incarcerating them for life already does. Additionally, as I mentioned, false convictions do happen. It takes time for new evidence to emerge that could exonerate someone. Executing them completely eliminates any chance for that. Story 41. Only yes if a person is completely and unquestionably guilty, like a psychopath who committed the atrocities. There are individuals like Anders Breivik. Such individuals are unlikely to be rehabilitated. Some declare they will kill again and repeat that statement before being released from prison after serving time for their previous crimes, and then they commit another crime. There are many examples, but there is a pattern for serial killers and psychopaths. Story 42. In an ideal world, every state would have the death penalty, and it would not take long to execute someone. Appeals might add a maximum of 5 years. Unfortunately, we are far from an ideal world, not even close to mediocre. Story 43. Yes, because what kind of person wants to pay for the room and board of the murderer who killed their loved one? Story 44. No, for many reasons. It is expensive, ineffective, and there have been cases where an executed prisoner was proven to be innocent after death. Overall, the only reason to maintain it is to theoretically make some people feel better. In my opinion, That is not a sufficient motivation to continue the practice. Story 45. It costs about $1.2 million more per inmate than keeping them in prison for life. Since 1973, over 200 people have been proven innocent and released from death row. Who knows how many more were not that lucky? Black and Hispanic individuals represent 30% of the United States population, but they account for 53% of death row inmates. About 3% of executions are botched, and most of these incidents involve Black individuals. Story 46. A state should not execute its citizens. Costs more money due to appeals. It does not deter crime. Vengeance is not justice. Mistakes are made. Medical professionals should not be allowed to oversee executions, as it is a violation of their oath, and executions should not be performed by non-medical personnel. It is a paradox. Story 47. It is applied unequally, but we do not need to house and feed a mass shooter for 60 years. The real answer is not to eliminate it, but to apply it with more consideration for equity. It should also be applied to those prosecuting. If an investigator, judge, or lawyer is found to have manipulated the process and an innocent person is put to death, they should receive the same penalty. Story 48. No, but only because the justice system is not entirely foolproof. Innocent people can and do get convicted of crimes they did not commit, and if you kill them and then find out it wasn't them, you cannot take that back. Story 49. I believe it is wrong, but some of the individuals who are executed, I don't think it should have happened, though I might feel differently about some of them. Like most opponents of the death penalty, I find the system too flawed and often biased to justify executing people. It is also cruel and traumatic for those assigned to carry out executions. Medical professionals take an oath to do no harm. Story 50. There is a short story called The Bet that discusses whether the death penalty is more humane than life imprisonment. Story 51. It would only truly work if we knew for certain that a person was a risk to society, particularly those who continue to commit horrific crimes. However, how do we prove they are not innocent within the current system? I believe individuals who repeatedly harm others are not suitable for this world, especially if they continue their behavior despite treatment and rehabilitation. Sometimes, actions may need to be taken for the greater good, but it is often difficult to demonstrate that this wouldn't lead to the demise of innocent people. The system simply does not work. Story 52. If the justice system did not have so many people falsely accused of crimes, I would be more accepting of the death penalty. I used to fully support it, but then I realized how often individuals are wrongly accused and charged. If we assume that everyone is correctly charged, I do support the death penalty. Story 53. I agree with it in principle, but do not trust our justice system to implement it justly. Story 54. The last man hanged in Australia was Ronald Ryan in 1967. It now seems clear logically that he did not commit the shooting. Story 55. For me, it depends on the severity of the crime. I believe that if someone is truly guilty, they should face consequences. However, if an individual poses a significant danger and is too difficult to keep incarcerated, I would support the death penalty to some extent. I hope that makes sense. Story 56. I believe there are individuals who deserve severe consequences for their actions, and society may be better off without them. However, I do not trust any government to always make the right decision. Additionally, the evidence does not strongly indicate that the death penalty reduces crime. Therefore, I do not find a compelling argument for it, whether from a rational or moral standpoint, despite there being many individuals I would be happy to see face dire consequences. Story 57. Agree in theory that some criminals are better off dead. However, I do not agree in practice since the legal system is not foolproof, and we should not risk executing an innocent person. Story 58. No, because there have been a few cases where the accused was not actually guilty, but evidence was not provided at trial, and the prisoner had already been put to death. Story 59. No. Too many innocent people end up suffering consequences. I admit that some individuals may deserve punishment, but given the flaws in the system, I would prefer they be imprisoned for life rather than risk the lives of those who genuinely did nothing wrong because the justice system failed. Story 60. No. especially with the advent of generative artificial intelligence and deepfake technology. I don't care if 1,000 people witnessed someone shoot another in the head. Put them in prison for the legally allowed maximum time. To elaborate, this falls in line with why I support the right to choose. If the state has the authority to put someone to death, eventually it will be abused. Just like the state being able to restrict a form of healthcare, which will eventually seep into other areas, not just abortion. This is also why I don't agree with the label of felon, and as much as I dislike thinking this, to be consistent, the sex offender registry. If you serve your time, that's it. Your past actions shouldn't follow you around. This is the premise of time served. There's far more to discuss, like how our prison system isn't for reform but for forced labor. But whatever. Story 61. Generally speaking, no. Innocent people will inevitably be executed, and it takes too long to carry out. I believe that even murderers are capable of moral redemption, and I don't think it's just to execute someone who is 55 years old and committed his crime at 21, especially if he has changed completely while in prison. That being said, there are certain crimes committed with a level of brutality and cruelty that warrant a death sentence. When those two individuals who dragged James Byrd to death behind a truck were executed, I wasn't shaking my head. While I support the total abolition of capital punishment, I would also compromise on it being reserved only for these types of crimes. Story 62. Yes, the decision should be made by the public, not just by a judge, a few jury members, and lawyers. It should involve a nationwide public vote. Story 63. If we lived in a perfect justice system where only the guilty were charged, that would be ideal. There are some crimes that are so heinous that I feel the death penalty is completely justified. However, given the reality of our current justice system in the United States, I do not believe it is justified. Story 64. No, not because we should coddle them, but because they need to be studied. We must find out what made them commit murder. Only by tracing the root cause of murder can we find a solution. We cannot do that if they are dead. Story 65. Some individuals commit such heinous acts that they forfeit their right to life. However, the state should not engage in capital punishment. It is a complex issue. Story 66. No, for several different deep thoughts. Overall, before I formulate an opinion on the death penalty, I appreciate that I'm free to be gay, which means I face the death penalty or stoning in some places. At least in America, others can choose not to accept a homosexual, but at least I won't die. Story 67. The death penalty is the most effective specific deterrent that exists. That person will never commit that crime again. Its effectiveness as a general deterrent is unclear. Story 68. We need to eliminate the death penalty while also easing gun restrictions. This approach would deter potential criminals from attacking individuals. You do not see cat burglars in states with castle doctrine laws. If you are willing to take a test and learn how to use and clean a firearm properly, you should be allowed to carry it with you wherever you go. You might have to hand it over to law enforcement in a courtroom, but you should be able to retrieve it afterward. I am tired of gun-free zones. Watch the videos of police officers avoiding these areas during active shooter situations. Now compare that to videos of a criminal attempting to rob a well-armed pawn shop. The criminal is neutralized within seconds. Story 69. I agree with the theory that some crimes are so heinous that society does not view rehabilitation as possible, and therefore death may be the best way to keep society safe from further harm. I also believe that society, based on the values and ethics of the time, can choose death as a penalty for a crime or as an alternative to lifetime imprisonment, where the offender will always be a burden. However, I have yet to see a legal system that I trust to make such determinations with sufficient accuracy and fairness to target the offenders and release those who do not deserve the ultimate punishment. Certainly, in my country, innocent people are put to death, and others are condemned based merely on their skin color or other irrelevant factors. So while I recognize some arguments for the death penalty, I cannot in good conscience support its use in modern society. Story 70. No, it is incorrect and does not actually achieve the intended purpose. People do not avoid committing crimes to evade the death penalty. Story 71. It depends on whether the criminal is willing to atone. Redemption is possible for anyone, but only if they choose to acknowledge that they were wrong. I would say if the criminal realizes what they did was awful and chooses to be better, with proof that they are sincere, then they do not need to die. However, if they refuse to change or if it happens again, then they should face serious consequences. Story 72. If what they did really warranted a death penalty, it must have been something heinous. They deserve to rot in jail rather than get the easy way out. Story 73. I like it in theory, but the problem is that our justice system sometimes convicts innocent people. The Innocence Project is helping individuals overturn their wrongful convictions, some of whom could face the death penalty. I don't believe there is any meaningful guarantee that only the truly guilty are punished. Story 74. Absolutely not. Aside from there being no benefit whatsoever, I do not want to be complicit in anyone's murder, which is exactly what supporting the death penalty means. We know that the justice system is not perfect and has executed innocent people before. I do not care what the person has been accused of. Being left to rot for the rest of your life is punishment enough if you did it, and there is always a possibility that they did not do it, allowing them to at least get some of their life back. Once someone is put to death, you cannot reverse that decision. It is really that simple. Story 75. As someone who has a history with death, I understand that sometimes it is the only way for survivors to find peace in their lives. However, it should only be assigned when there is undeniable proof, such as photographs or DNA evidence. Story 76. I was recently asked if I would be okay with the individual who hypothetically murders my mother not being sentenced to death. I said yes. Why? Because the criminal justice system makes mistakes, regardless of how airtight it claims to be or how much burden of proof it believes it has. If exacting justice by having a loved one's murderer pay the heaviest price means that a completely innocent person could be put to death, then I am not in favor of it. Story 77. No, it's murder, first degree. By sentencing someone else to death, you are equally corrupt as a murderer. Just because the law says you can, doesn't mean it's right. Story 78. Do I agree with it as a penalty for certain crimes? Yes, I do. There are some individuals that we as a society cannot afford to allow to continue to exist. However, I oppose it in our legal system because the risk of executing an innocent person is far too high. The system is too imperfect. We can never be completely certain of guilt. Therefore, we should never impose such an irreversible and final punishment. Story 79. A government that can kill its own people under certain circumstances can find any excuse to harm others. Story 80. No, because there is always the possibility that the jury was mistaken, and life without parole seems like a worse sentence. However, I understand that the victim's loved ones may desire retribution. Their opinion holds more weight than mine. Revenge does not restore what they have lost, though. Story 81. Yes, but only for certain crimes, and there must be concrete evidence, not circumstantial. Anyone who commits a serious crime against a child should face capital punishment. Story 82. Yes and no. I think if there is irrefutable evidence of a person committing a horrendous act, such as being caught on camera, then I am okay with the death penalty. Otherwise, they just sit in prison waiting to die. However, police sometimes lie or make mistakes, and there have been many cases where individuals were exonerated. Therefore, I would not support the death penalty in many cases because the evidence can sometimes be unreliable. Story 83. No, because the thought of one wrongly convicted person being executed by one's government is monstrous. Story 84. I do. And torture. We only need to know the nationality, exactly like the United States does. American, Russian, Israeli. Story 85. I believe in punishment. Therefore, I agree with it. If it is not significantly corrupted by a justice system that prioritizes conviction over truth, I will always support it. Some individuals deserve to face severe consequences. They do not deserve rehabilitation or to live their lives consuming more taxpayer resources. Story 86. I believe that some people truly deserve to die. That said, I do not trust any human-run judicial system to be both fair and flawless in its application of the death penalty, including who it applies to and its conviction records. Therefore, despite my personal beliefs about any given convict, I cannot agree with supporting it. Besides, we are supposed to be better than criminals, right? So how does state-sponsored murder align with that? Story 87. Only in cases where there is no doubt that the person committed the crime and they display truly sadistic behavior should severe consequences be considered. There is no doubt that Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy are guilty, as well as Richard Ramirez. However, in most cases, a person's guilt is not entirely certain, particularly in instances of domestic violence and friendships gone wrong. I also believe that in cases like Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., individuals who commit rape deserve the death penalty as well. Story 88. In principle, I have no moral objection to capital punishment in heinous crimes where there is no hope for atonement. I just do not want that power institutionalized and in the hands of the state. Story 89. No, because there is no way we can be 100% correct, as innocent people have been put to death before. An eye for an eye is not how crime and punishment should work, in my opinion. Story 90. Yes, God never intended for prisons to exist. He, the one who created humans, knows what best motivates them and what punishment is most effective. Physical punishment, when executed correctly, is the most effective reform tool. And yes, we have been given the right to take a life if the crime warrants it. A common rebuttal is the lack of trust in the justice system. That argument is weak. Obviously, capable individuals need to be in place to make sound decisions. Once that is compromised, the entire system fails. Therefore, having a group of responsible individuals who understand justice and who can eliminate the loopholes that defense attorneys use to confuse the issue would be a beneficial starting point. Story 91. Absolutely. I understand the arguments against it. Yes, the cost of repeat appeals is high. However, the costs associated with life sentences include medical coverage and additional legal fees every time an inmate wants to sue for any reason. Additionally, there are costs related to damages and injuries, including death, that can occur while imprisoned, affecting both inmates and guards. These additional costs rise as inmates age. Regarding the deterrence factor, there is no realistic way to determine if it actually deters crime. What is certain is that a person who is executed will not commit another crime. Innocent people may die. Unfortunately, no system is ever perfect. That said, if a person has been found guilty, exhausted all evidence, navigated all appeals, and spent many years in jail only to be found innocent moments before execution, the chances of them ever having a normal or good life are slim to none. The final problem is who gets executed. Many think of just murderers, but they are often the least concerning. The real drains on society are the gang leaders serving multiple life sentences without parole who proudly admit to their crimes. Why are we paying for them to live a life of ease? What about child molesters with thousands of images and videos who have caused untold harm? Do you really believe they won't repeat their offenses? We can forgive them, but we cannot forgive their actions, and there is no closure brought to anyone by their life or death. Just the knowledge that they can no longer inflict harm. It is selfish to say we must keep alive those who take joy in causing pain and death in others just to keep our own conscience clear. Story 92. Absolutely not. If there is even a small chance that the system might kill an innocent person, then it is not worth it. How can we justify killing a murderer if we risk killing innocent people in the process? It does not make sense at all. Story 93. I don't primarily support it because of how poorly it has been implemented. It often results in the wealthy receiving minor jail time at worst, while the poor face severe consequences. Additionally, there is a significant issue of racism associated with it. If we could address all the problems related to it, I might be more accepting in rare cases such as murder or child exploitation, but I do not trust our system enough. Story 94. There are certain crimes that deserve the death penalty, but there is a risk that an innocent person might end up dying because the system is not and will never be perfect. Story 95. The legal process can make mistakes and is often abused by corrupt individuals. I have seen firsthand victims of actual crimes have the script flipped on them because the person they were trying to be protected from had more money than they did. Under the death penalty, there is no chance to say, "Oops, we made a mistake." or to find time to prove the system was being abused and that the wrong people were being punished. Sure, maybe you remove some of the worst offenders from society permanently, but you will catch many more innocent people in the crossfire. Even individuals who may have done something wrong but do not deserve to die. A judge may become overzealous or may have angered someone powerful. Additionally, the death penalty is punishment in a court of law, and laws can change. Life and death should not be decided by that system. I also believe people should be reformed and reintegrated rather than simply put away to rot or executed on the spot. I do not think many countries have the resources to do that properly. However, I know that sometimes the best solution to a crime problem is former criminals leading the youth away from a life of crime with the experience they had in that system and their perspective of choosing to do something different. These are the individuals who genuinely reach the people who can be reformed and saved. Not a politician, not a police officer, not a judge. A good lawmaker or police officer or judge can make a difference, but at the end of the day, it is the people in your own community who have the most influence over you. If you never give individuals who have made mistakes a chance to do better, even the worst of them, it becomes a challenging line to draw. Retribution does not truly work. It does not make anyone feel better. I have friends and family who have experienced horrific things, and friends who are no longer with us because of what happened to them. Neither I nor my friends, even those who were literally murdered, would feel better if the people who did these things to us were executed. Story 96. The justice system has imprisoned innocent individuals for decades, releasing them only when overwhelming evidence supporting their innocence is revealed. You can free someone after 16 years of wrongful imprisonment, but you cannot bring someone back from the dead. Our justice system is flawed. Story 97. I do not agree with this now. However, if someone harmed my children, I would want to take action against them myself. Story 98. There are numerous stories of individuals wrongly convicted of crimes, which makes it difficult for me to fully support capital punishment. In principle, I agree with it. The senseless act of a murderer cannot be compared to the reasoned, informed decisions made by a judge and jury. I am also convinced that so-called humane methods of execution are often attempts to sanitize the process for the sake of witnesses. Hanging, for example, cannot be an instant means of execution. The neck may break, but I am not convinced that the individual is not just hanging for a period, waiting to die. I had hopes that lethal injection would be a reliable method of execution, but that has not proven to be the case. Personally, I believe that placing the convict in a chamber filled with inert gas, such as nitrogen, helium, or argon, is the best way to ensure a painless death. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.